adopted in 2022. We are working to help member states develop robust national data policies, strategies, and strengthen member state capacity building in data governance. As we work to build data-driven economies across the continent, we must be acutely aware of the persistent gender digital divides and gender data gaps that exist. These gaps may pose a significant barrier to the full participation of African women in the digital economy. So this session will explore the importance of a gendered approach to data and digital environment. We must ensure that the unique needs of women, girls, and marginalized communities are recognized and met. So this required the intentional application of a gender lens in the implementation of the EU data policy framework and the development of national data policies and strategies. So we have a distinguished panel joining us today. Some of them are online. Notably Mrs. Patricia Aduse-Poku, who's Executive Director and Data Commissioner in Ghana. We also have Mrs. Suzanne El-Kabawi, who's advisor to the ICT Minister on Data Governance for the government of Egypt. We have Mr. Victor Asila, who's Senior Manager in Data Science, working for Safaricom. And on site, we do have Mrs. Bonita Nyamwere, Director of Research for Policy. And then we have Mr. Osei Kagiya, who represent the youth, who's a youth representative in IGF. So, I will give the floor to starting with my online speakers. My name is Christelle Onana, sorry. I work for the African Union Development Agency as a senior program officer, and I also lead the digitalization unit. So without any further delay, because we are a bit late on our agenda, I'll ask to my online distinguished speakers to present themselves in about a minute, present the work that they do in relation to data governance, and then we'll move to the one on site. Thank you. Mrs. Suzanne El-Kabawi, you can start, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Suzanne El-Kabawi. I am advisor to the Minister for Data Governance with the main mandate to establish the Egyptian Personal Data Protection Center, which is the National Data Protection Authority in Egypt. We are about to launch the center. And that's it. I'm working with His Excellency Minister of Communication and Information Technology on data governance in general, but I am specifically mandated with establishing the Personal Data Protection Center and implementing the Personal Data Protection Law in Egypt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Patricia Aduse-Poku.
Hello, hope you can hear me. It's good morning from where I am today. I am, as introduced, the Commissioner for Data Protection in Ghana. I have a data governance background, and I have led on behalf of Ghana the documentation of the regional blueprint in collaboration with the Smart Africa, the data governance strategy, and we've gone on to document the Ghana National Data Governance Strategy. Having just completed our Ghana National AI Strategy and the ethical use of AI strategy, we are going ahead to implement these strategies on behalf of the nation. I have led the establishment of the regional network of data protection authorities, and I'm currently in charge of the Anglophone African data protection strategy, and the immediate past president of the network of African data protection authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Sir, Mr. Victor Asila, please.
So, good morning from where I am. My name is Victor Asila. You can otherwise call me Kwendo. I work as a senior manager in the data science function at Safaricom. So I've been with Safaricom for slightly above 3 years. But in total, I had 11 years of experience within the data field. So I'm a statistician by training, currently practicing as a data scientist. I majorly specialize in application of data science in credit risk. I take care of our finance needs, finance needs in terms of data science, and also our business called DigiFarm, which focuses on empowering farmers in terms of access to credit. So I'm very delighted to be here and looking forward to share my knowledge within the data field. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are equally delighted to have you on the panel. So on site, Mrs. Bonita.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonita Nyamwire, and I work for Policy. Policy is based in Kampala in Uganda. Policy is POLLICY, standing for Paul, and use the information to influence policy change. I lead the research department at Policy, and we work at the intersection of data, design, and technology to ensure that women and girls across the African continent have their voices and experiences in the data and digital technology space. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonita. And our last speaker, Jose.
Good day, everyone. My name is Jose Keja from Ghana. I'm a public interest technologist. I work at an intersection of technology and human society. I'm also a youth rep for the Ghana Internet Governance Forum, Youth Internet Governance Forum, the West Africa Youth Internet Governance Forum, and also the Africa Youth Internet Governance Forum. Nice to meet you all and hoping for insightful conversation.
Thank you. So we will then start our discussion with the first round of questions. I would like to start with Mrs. Suzanne El-Kabawi.
Yes.
So being the advisor to the ICT minister for the government of Egypt and leading the future Egyptian data commission, if I can say, as a government representative, how do you think that the government in Africa within the continent should ensure that women and marginalized groups within the continent have control over their data in a way that respect their privacy and agency?
Well, to start with, I would say that there is a very important aspect to it that is related to awareness. Awareness is key in this case. Proper education about the risks associated with the lack of representation in data and how it impacts the decision that will be taken are key. I believe this is the first and most important pillar. There are additional matters that could be added to this, varying from creating inclusive policies and regulations, whereby the governments should create and enforce policies that address the need and rights of women and marginalized groups. Typically, this should happen in the personal data protection laws and regulations. In line with the awareness aspect, there should be promoting digital literacy, having accessibility to women, giving accessibility to women to use the internet and all the digital solutions that are available. Promoting digital literacy comes through the provision of education and training, which eventually should empower women and the marginalized groups to understand the rights and implications and the risks associated with misuse of data or mishandling of personal data. I also believe that an important aspect that could make women have more control over their data is to support STEM education. Typically, if and this is the case in Egypt, there has been an important development in this respect. We have a lot of women working or becoming educated in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And these fields foster critical thinking and creativity, problem-solving skills, and they encourage women to apply the knowledge in real world. There is also the community engagement and the role of tech companies, the role of non-government organizations to educate and take active actions with the government in stating culture of privacy and in reaching women, teaching them and educating them about their rights, working together with government so that the laws and regulations come in a way that cater to the needs of these women and to guarantee that they have a proper representation in data sets where decisions are taken so that they are not marginalized. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Allow me to have a follow-up question on this. So you mentioned, thank you so much for your contribution. You mentioned quite a lot of points as of what you believe need to be done to ensure that the women in marginalized group have control over the data privacy and agency. You mentioned awareness as a key element, create inclusive policies and regulation, promoting digital literacy. But can you tell us concretely, except the support to the STEM education, where you specifically mentioned that the Egyptian government has started, where else, what concretely has been done in Egypt into that regard?
As it is the case in most of Africa, the protection of personal data is still a very novel concept, and we are still taking baby steps. We have a general strategy in Egypt for the year 2030. And we are in a process of digitalizing all government services. And there is a work around raising awareness about the importance of having proper data sets that are accurate, that are up to date, that are inclusive of women. There is a work that has been done around infrastructure so that internet reaches and the use of the digital services reaches most of the country, including women and those in marginalized groups. There are a lot of training provided through the Ministry of Telecommunication to young generations and allowing specifically women to work and be trained in relation to digital services. Accordingly, or in line with this, the law, the Egyptian Personal Data Protection Law was issued in 2020, and it was pending the issuance of the executive regulations. Mandate, and the law had provided for the establishment of the Personal Data Protection Center, and the Personal Data Protection Center has mandates to raise awareness and to work on encouraging and educating people about encouraging the use of digital services and educating people about their rights. Women in specific are also targeted on various fronts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your follow-up answer. We'll move to the next one, to Mrs. Atuse Poku, who represents the Ghanaian National Data Protection Commission. So in regards with your role as data commissioner, how do you think you should support the enforcement of such gender-inclusive data policies? Ms. Patricia.
Thank you. I believe in the data protection field specifically that there has been an excellent inroad in the establishment of women in privacy careers generally, because when I look at our global assemblies, there are a lot of women involved in the management of privacy as a fundamental human right. But generally on this subject, I believe that opportunity should be given to girls and women in education establishment in all, not only in STEM studies, but in general education opportunities that are in the area of technology and digitization, because obviously the world is moving into digitized economies, and there are various opportunities in digitization, though yes, technology is a science subject and it's good to encourage girls to take science subjects, but even in generic art subjects, if women had equal opportunities as men to get education, even general education, and then later on in life or even earlier steer into the specific aspect of data governance or internet management that they're interested in, that the world will benefit as a whole. Specifically in the African region, yes, I agree with my colleague Susanna that there's a new awakening in the African region around data protection and its insights. But I think that generally it's data protection is an area that underpins all aspects of our lives and crosses all sectors. And therefore, wherever you find yourself in health, education, every aspect of our lives, you will find data protection there, because everyone is collecting data to be able to run their business or organize themselves. And so everywhere that we find ourselves, we should be encouraging girls and ladies to participate equally, and not just in science subjects, but even in general arts. And in my office, we have people performing all sorts of roles, and the majority of them are women. And
Thank
even
you.
across Africa, we have more women commissioners than men.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. We'll maybe have a research perspective here with Bonita. How do you define a gender inclusive data future, and which components you think are required to achieve it?
Thank you so much, Christelle. So a gender inclusive data future actually includes some of the things that Susan was talking about. But generally, it is where systems, data systems policies, technologies are designed and implemented to equitably represent, include, and serve individuals across all genders. So they are generally inclusive and not leaving anyone behind or out of any processes. So this kind of approaches then addresses the biases and any systemic inequalities, ensuring that data empowers the marginalized groups, promotes gender equity, and drives inclusive decision-making. And some of the components of such an inclusive data future include disaggregated data, which is one major key component. And this is data not disaggregated by sex, as in male and female, which we usually do, but gender disaggregated data. Data disaggregated across a list of intersecting identities, including gender, including ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, and so on and so forth. And then the other component is a research methodology that includes voices of marginalized people or groups, and these are the historically marginalized groups, including women, including persons with disabilities, children, youth. And so this kind of approach that includes them, and including them means including them right from the conceptualization of projects, if I can say, you know, having representatives like women individuals who have expertise in that area, having women's rights organizations that work in, let's say, data governance, digital technology, representing women experiences in such process. So you move with them throughout the whole process in the research process, in the methodology, but also it is within the document, not just moving them with them in the process, but they appear in the document, because the documents also, they guide as it's necessary to include them, because these methods we use in research, when we document our processes, we allow others to replicate our work, to replicate our methods. So it is important to include them in the processes, but also to document these processes. Then the other one is adapting tools that do not reinforce stereotypes. Tools in terms of tools, have you used the research word tools, meaning questionnaires, surveys, question guides that have questions that do not reinforce stereotypes. For instance, you may have a question, let's say, which could be like, do you think men are more powerful than women in the digital tech ecosystem? That is already a biased question. So if you have such questions, it means that even the information that you're collecting, the data that you're going to collect is going to be biased already. Even the responses you're getting, because if you ask me, I will say yes, or another person, they will directly say yes. And yeah, respondents usually have that tendency. So you'll find that the data is already biased right from collection, because the questions you're using, they are already biased in that way. Then the other component is to have gender response policies that mandate the inclusion of gender perspectives in data initiatives. So Susan was talking about governments having proper data sets that are accurate and inclusive of women experiences and needs. So here you need to have these gender responsive policies, to have these proper data sets that are accurate and inclusive of women experiences. You need women experts also at the level of policy making at different levels so that they can voice the issues and needs of women. So you need the women representatives, and this is women and girls, not only women. So even the language matters that we use in these issues, because when we say women, people tend to think that we are focusing on older women, but we are focusing on all women and girls. So for me, an advocate for gender equality, I would like to say that we use both words together, women and girls, so that we don't seem to be moving with women, but we are moving with girls on also, and meaning that we are moving with girls right from the younger ages up to the later ages, the other women, the older women. So, and then the last one, Christelle, is use of intersectional approaches to recognize and address how multiple forms of discrimination intersect in data systems. So intersectional approaches, looking at different intersecting identities. I think I already talked about that, but also intersection of things at different stages, in data collection, in analysis and everything, so that you can be able to recognize any gaps that are there, any discrepancies that are there within the data systems. I can stop at that.
Thank you so much for your very elaborated answer. Allow me to follow up on some of the things that you have mentioned. You did talk about disaggregated data, not only disaggregated data, but disaggregated, gender disaggregated data. What is the difference? Because you said not disaggregated in terms of male and female, and then you talk about gender disaggregated. So that's one question. Another one was based on what you said, when you say we need women at all levels to make it happen. I agree, and I think it collaborates with what Suzanne said earlier, but are we not going to create an unbalance in a reverse way with the male or the other gender, trying to have it gender balance for the women and the girls?
No, I will start with the last one. Thank you so much. We cannot create, because if you're to look at where we are now, how many women do we have at different levels? Women in STEM, there are very few. Women at different levels and commissions in digital technology, in data governance, there are very few. Women in research, there are very few. Myself, people usually tell me that I like to do hard things. These are things not for women. Women do soft things. Bonita, you like doing hard things. Can you do soft things for women? But who said the hard things are not for women? They are for everybody. We can do them. So there is not totally going to be any imbalance anywhere, because already as women, our numbers are very few in digital technology, in data governance at the different levels, whether it is even here speaking. I have been speaking on panels on data governance, and sometimes I find I am the only woman among like 5 men, a panel of 5 men. So you see, there is no imbalance already. So we need to bring as more women as possible, and there's not going to be any imbalance. We are actually going to balance the figures. So then going back to the gender disaggregated data. So usually what we usually see is sex disaggregated data, male, female. That's what we usually have, boys and girls, and we end at that. But which girls are we talking about? There are girls in the rural area. There are girls who are between 7 and 10, 10 and 15, that kind of categorization. There are girls who, so it brings in the aspect of intersectionality in gender disaggregated data. You look at the different characteristics. Usually in statistics and in science, they call them socio-demographic characteristics. You look at age. You disaggregate the data. So disaggregation means breaking it down. So you break down the data when you say 20% of women do not use internet. Which women are we talking about? It's go down and show that it is actually women in the rural, but it is also women in the rural area who are not educated or who have not been to school or who ended at primary level or secondary level, but also it is women who do not own smartphones actually. You see, so you disaggregate up to the lowest point. So disaggregation of this data according to the gender intersecting identities comes with gender expertise. So you need people with the expertise within the system. If it is research, you need such people. You need those people who have that knowledge, who have that training to be able to guide on that. So that's why I was saying that at the different levels, so you do not come when you already have the data set and you're looking at it and you say, okay, so I want to disaggregate this data, but you didn't form the questions from the beginning to allow you collect that data. So they move hand in hand. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your complementary explanations. So we will come back to what we mentioned before, what we started with you, the key component required to achieve the gender inclusive data future. And you mentioned some of them as being the system, the policies, the technologies that we need to use from the beginning. So now I'll move to Victor online, hooking onto the technology side of it. I understood you're working with AI and big data. What opportunities and what are the risks that you see in this technology that they present for the gender inclusive data policies? How do you work with them? Yeah,
thank you. So AI and big data analytics indeed hold a very significant potential in shaping our gender inclusive technologies. I would tackle that in two ways. Number one, I would tackle the opportunities bit, and I would like to tackle it from a generative AI perspective. So these are fairly new new technology of generating information. I think it came to life sometime in 2002 with ChatGPT going public. So in that regard, these models, as one of the speakers has alluded to, are trained with data that has some inherent bias from us human beings who generate the data. So the models themselves do carry or propagate some of that biases, and we need to ensure that we do not propagate those biases as we use these technologies. So one way of addressing the biases is by way of synthetic data generation. So normally, the biases that we as human beings carry as we generate data are usually propagated through the models. But when we'd want to use these models, from a practice perspective, we usually do what we call fine-tuning of these models so that the models work in a very specific environment that is very specific to let's say a business need or a certain type of question that we need the technologies to work for. So as we fine-tune these models, we can generate synthetic data that addresses some of the biases or overcome some of the biases that we as human beings do exhibit as we generate the data that is currently in the environment. So I mean, as we generate this data, this synthetic data, we will address the bias bits, and therefore we have a chance to collect the data, generate data that can help us shape our policies towards agenda towards addressing some of the marginalized genders within the society. unrepresented groups would ideally fall into that category. And therefore, in overall, we have an opportunity with synthetic data to balance the data sets as that we as data scientists or data practitioners do have available to us to work with. Then number two, we have an opportunity to come up with or address the privacy protection bit. So when we synthesize data, we can protect the privacy of individuals by generating data that closely mimics the real world data without exposing PII, that is identifiable, personal identifiable information. So therefore, with that, we can kill two stones with the same bird by having a way of addressing privacy protection regulation. And also with we will in a way comply to the global data regulations that are in place. I mean specifically for an organization like Safaricom, we are part of a group that is multinational. So we are part of the Vodafone group, we are part of the Vodacom group, and therefore with this we are able to we are able to comply with the different data protection requirements or regulations that cut across nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Do you mind if I come back to the question and if I ask you if you were to answer to my grandmother about the challenges and opportunities in 1 or 2 minutes, what will you say?
Well, the challenge, the challenges is that it's sometimes while addressing these gender-related inequalities, we would be exposed to gender-specific information, and with that poses as a risk. By exposing this gender-specific information to people, then people will get insights about these gender-specific risks, and therefore malicious people can use this information or these insights to propagate agendas that are not necessarily good for these marginalized genders. So that's one major risk that I would highlight in summary, and the other risk would be that there is a challenge in scaling. I spoke about synthetic data in the mitigation bit. There's a challenge in scalability in generating data at scale. So we would need enough compute resources to do data generation, and therefore would need more investments from our organizations or governments to meet the synthetic data needs. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's how I would summarize it.
Thank you so much. So we'll be back in the room here with the youth representative that we have. We have a question for him. So Osei, as a youth representative, what role do you see yourself playing in achieving this gender inclusive data future? What can you do at your level if we are to be practical?
Thank you very much. It seems all over the world, the youth feel neglected, unheard, their voices feel throttled. Youths are forcing. Oftentimes, we do tell them to keep on keeping on, being forceful, but we may skirt around the issue. We may talk of participatory, but we are often seen as add-ons, as props to the occasion in designing these frameworks and all those things. And a classical example is the framing of our data protection acts and strategies and policies. how many youths are part of these things. Their ever-longing aspirations, demands, desires, rights, which keep changing. But we are not invited to the table. We are add-ons when everything is framed. It doesn't even take community-driven approach. It's for class people in the room. The voice are not heard.
Allow me to jump in. So here in the room, online, we have a government representative, we have a tech person, we have a researcher, we have a commissioner. Practically, what do you recommend, or what should they be doing when they engage within their respective roles?
So I would say that it should be participatory. And when we talk of participatory, when we delve deeper, it should be community driven. We should be heard. We should be considered as part of the solution. We are not saying youth are monolith of knowledge or say repository of all knowledge. But one thing which Honorable Minister Stanley Olajide mentioned last Tuesday, which was a bit, it did strike everyone in the room. He said information, there was a bill in Nigeria, and there was a Nigerian youth who came around to propose something, and it didn't change the entire perspective of this bill. So what we are saying that it should be participatory, it should take committee-driven approach where those biases are eliminated. We are talking about gender. It's all over where you take social norm. It's a big problem. But even in solving this problem, there's still that bias. So I'm very happy there is a minister from ICT and also advisor from Egypt, and also Miss Patricia Eduse-Poku from my country, Ghana. I'd like to ask them, in answering my question, I'm also asking them, are they inviting us to the table? Are we going to be add-ons when everything is done? Thank you.
Thank you, Ose. So we have made the first round of discussion. I would like to open the floor to the participant in the room. If there are any questions to the panel. Yes, please, ma'am. If you don't mind, you present yourself very quickly and then you ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nin. She brought me today, if I should say, but no. Thank you, Christelle. I work also as the senior advisor to Transform Health, which is a coalition of 150 organizations working for health for all in the digital age. I wanted to come back to something. It's just an information and a contribution. Health data might very well be the use case for personal health protection, which basically has more women and girls affected, because health is one area where women are the greatest consumers and greatest data subjects. And I'm working on health data principles. You might want to check healthdataprinciples.org, and even on a model law that we would like to share with people. If anyone is interested, I'd like to talk more about it. But I just wanted to come back to the AU data policy. I probably would speak to you after this panel. I'm happy to be here because there's also something called a youth experts for health that someone is in Ghana, and I'd like to connect both of you. And in the upcoming AU summit, we would like to I'm convening a roundtable on health data governance. I know that we're talking about data, hard data here, but I believe that my contribution now is that health data might very well be the use case for us as we go along in the AU data principles, in data protection, and Patricia, thank you for the blueprint that Smart Africa launched. I'm aware of it. I'm looking at it. And the model law on health data contributed to that. My question to our panelists will be, how do we engage on a one data governance approach. In other words, I have been to about 8 countries in the last 6 months on data governance, I must say. And what I see is that sometimes we have health data with the ministry, we have personal data with a regulator or the ICT ministry, and we have data governance in many places. And maybe Crystal, are we allowed to ask a question to the moderator? Because you are home, AU is our home, and that AU data principle is our biggest framework so far, right? Even if we're working at national level, if we're working on health data, if we're working on telecoms data, if we're working on mobility data, the AU data principle is still our base. And the question will be, how do we ensure that in the implementation of the AU data principle framework, we have a gender inclusive approach at country level, at thematic level? And when the rubber hits the road, how do we ensure that we have a united governance approach to this? I know that Patricia has a good experience in this. We know ourselves. She's come a long way in managing this in Ghana. So my question is, how do we ensure gender inclusivity in our implementation, and how do we engage within a one data, one government approach? And I'm here to speak with anyone who is interested in healthdataprinciples.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Any other questions before we revert with answers in the room? One, two, three. Okay. Dear Patricia, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Concerning the involvement of girls and youth in general in decision making and implementation, yes, it's a challenge, and I agree with Osei Keja from Ghana as to the afterthought of the implementation, but it's not entirely so in all cases. Though in the majority of cases, it's absolutely right. We should involve the youth more. In 2019, I set up a youth committee in my office, the Ghana Data Protection Commission, in the effort to involve the youth in the implementation effort. And they met once or twice, but I believe that the attention span is very short, and it did not continue. I am very happy to, in my space, look at that again and get a youth committee going, because I'm very interested in the youth and technology and the youth, especially the use of social media and in the governance space. So Osei, that is to you. If you can put that committee together, I will encourage it. My other colleague speaking about the data governance, the fragmentation of the application and implementation of data governance strategies. I have also cited that across various countries, and engaged the African Union as our leading supranational organization in the African space to try and unify the front and also to try and harmonize these strategies, which is becoming too many across the region, and making it very hard for us, the implementers, to find a path forward with it. I am engaging Suhaila in the African Union about the African data policy and how to ensure that we're singing from the one proverbial song sheets. We, in the involvement of gender in these spaces, I think I agree with all my preceding speakers about making a conscious effort and deciding consciously about how we increase the participation of women and involve girls, and also to look at the demographics of girls and in consideration at what stage in their life that we involve them in these decisions, because the world obviously is moving into that space, and in the education space, in offering internships, in opening doors to engage more women. I am in total agreement with other speakers here as to how we go about doing this. In my position in the region and nationally, I'm very open to other suggestions, especially from research experts and expert speakers here, to engage and to find out ways that those of us, the women who have excelled a bit, with a lot of struggle, I must say, to be where we are today, to also to give those up and coming a hand, to motivate them, to encourage them, and to bring more women in the management and governance spaces. I think it's a a good effort and a well-spoken points from all my peer speakers, and I'm welcoming suggestions and ideas on how to make this happen properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer. Maybe to add to this, because we are kind of running out of time, we are working, as we're implementing the EU data policy framework, we're working with the national data commissions within the continent, and I think it's a start to be intentional about the question, to have such discussion, to realize that it is a problem that needs to be addressed, to have this kind of discussion, but also as we implement to be intentional about that, meaning to bring that to the attention of the countries as the laws or the strategies or the policies are being drafted. We start the work on that as an institution. So unfortunately, we only had an hour for the session, and we have been reminded that the time was up. We would like to thank you, our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much for your availability in such a short period of time. Thank you for your participation today, for your contribution towards this important subject. And yeah, we hope to continue the discussion as we have planned next month at the IGF UN. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So the next session will be starting now. Bulanda.
Afternoon. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. How so the people online can pick me automatically from this? Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for joining this session that we've titled Saving the Internet We Want. This session is really meant to be more of a consultative process, but also more of an awareness raising process. It's really just to shed light on some of the threats to the internet that we've seen emerging, as well as to the multi-stakeholder model of the internet that we have all come to know and appreciate. It's a process that was begun by the National Democratic Institute. They've been leading on this alongside other stakeholders. So the objective really, like I said, it's more of a consultative process to hear from you on some of the key issues that will be presented here this afternoon, but that also of awareness raising of what has been happening and what's at stake with the current multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. As well as the ongoing debates about the renewal of the IGF. So that said, I'm Mulanda Nkowani, and I'm here with my colleague. I'll also give him a few minutes to introduce himself. Thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. So my name is Emmanuel Vitus, and as Mulanda rightly said, the objective of this session is for us to have a retrospective look, and also the future, how it look like, have your inputs to this process, because the processes have, most of them started last year and more intensively this year with the GDC, and we're looking at the renew of the IGF, as she said, mandate or not next year. So we'll look at the threats together, see what the dynamics going on in the ecosystem, and how can you as users or as stakeholders contribute to this process. So I think we can quickly have a general look from the past, and also look at the present, where we are now, and for the future, where you can actually chip in.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And to do that, we have this slide deck that we are beaming. We'll quickly go through it, and hopefully we'll leave ample time for some of the discussions. So as earlier mentioned, we may know or we may not know that the current internet governance structure is under attack. And with the way the internet operates now, things may not be the same come 2025, which is next year. Potentially, what we've all come to enjoy has been the multi-stakeholder process of the internet governance structure, where we have all these stakeholders, for example, highlighted to my left, where we all come together from the different stakeholder groups, from the government, civil society, academia, the technical community, and so on and so forth. And we see that the current proposals right now are that of a multilateral internet governance structure, which will be heavily led by governments. So we know that next year, stakeholders from every sector from the globe will gather at one forum to debate on the future of internet governance. And of course, a lot of topics will be on this table, pretty much covering the usual themes within the internet governance discussions, issues of connectivity, how do we keep the internet open, issues of emerging tech, and so on and so forth. So what is the future of the multi-stakeholder internet governance? So currently, with how this model has been working, we see that almost everyone can contribute to the evolution of the internet. You can contribute to the multi-stakeholder model, depending on the stakeholder group that you belong to. You can contribute to some of the open standards, and so on and so forth. So it's been a very participatory process, albeit other complexities. as we know, the internet is multi-layered, and I believe most of us in this room do understand all of the different layers that are there to the internet. But what is very important to remember is that whoever controls internet protocol will also control communication. Again, perhaps just to emphasize that, the different layers of the internet. So each stakeholder, again, here we see has different responsibilities. Either you're coming from the naming and addressing side of things, the open standards development. Are you coming from the local, national, regional, and global policy making side of things? So really just a brief overview for those that may not know the technicalities of how the layers of the internet operate. But I think also something that is very useful to highlight here are the users. I think oftentimes when we speak of internet governance, users, all of us at the end of the day are users of the internet. Sometimes we don't see ourselves within this map. Again, just a brief overview of the, of course, famous WSIS process, which ushered in what we now have as the Internet Governance Forum. So just a bit of a background in terms of how it began from the discussions within WSIS in Geneva, culminating into WSIS Tunis, where really we came to know what internet governance is. We got a definition from there and a working framework. So we see that these meetings established some form of values. So values around what integrity of the internet, it's being able to have a global reach, having innovation without permission, accessibility, collaboration, and so on and so forth. So why this moment, why this year? So we've seen that there are two big trends that emerged in 2024, going into 2025, where there has been a lot of conversations, obviously, around do we regulate technology? Do we not regulate it? If so, how do we do so? So a lot of conversations where we are seeing interest to almost overly regulate technology from the government side of things. We are also seeing from our friends from the Far East, where they've also, for example, released jointly building a community with a shared future in cyberspace. So really a whole different vision for internet governance that promotes almost an authoritarian approach. So what may change about the internet? So for example, you find that in 2019, China submitted about 238 proposals for new standards related to ICTs, and almost proposing what you would now call the new IP. And this is something that would allow internet service providers, usually who are state-owned, to have control and oversight over almost every device, almost over every IP address. And of course, this gives them the power to monitor, for example, the networks and some individual access. Then in terms of what's at stake, obviously, it's the democratic internet as we have come to know it. In that, going into 2025 and beyond, if we're not careful, we may end up with an authoritarian internet where we're going to, forfeit some of the values around openness, having a bottom-up participation that has been enabled, for example, through this multi-stakeholder internet governance process, issues around accessibility, collaboration, and the internet being decentralized. So while the current IGF structure obviously is not perfect, of course, there have been some criticisms in terms of what has this IGF structure achieved? What can we count as some of its successes? Sometimes the processes are too slow. So while we admit that, of course, this structure may have its flaws, but I think one thing also that you would count as a success would be the fact that it has enabled this multi-stakeholder process. Prior to that, would not meet in such a room from diverse backgrounds, coming together to discuss issues of how do we manage, or how does our internet evolve into the resource that it is. So we've really seen that interaction of different stakeholders within the structure. To some extent, besides having like the lack of concrete results, we also do see that this current model does encourage a human rights-based approach, especially to internet governance policy making. So with that background in mind, I'll now pass over to my colleague who will take us through what's at stake in the coming year and what we can do about it. Thanks. Over to you, Emmanuel.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bulanda. So as she rightly said, 2014, which is going to an end, although we still have Riyadh that is coming, is a big event. So I think the conversation will be tough there. And 2025, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, will be the year everything will be determined whether we continue with this model that we have now, or we go to analyze the model our friend from the Far East, as she proposed, China and Russia are proposing that new model to us. So in 2025, we'll have a response to that. And the objective of this whole process is for you to understand what is really at stake. So the GDC, that's the big picture. So it was adopted during the Summit of the Future in September, and it was negotiated by 193 governments. And they have now what they call a comprehensive framework for global governance of digital technology and artificial intelligence. So it was part of a larger Pact of the Future that seeks to reinvigorate the multilateral cooperation and also elevate the office of the Secretary General Envoy on Tech as key implementer of the GDC. So we keep talking about the GDC. I know some of you have contributed at the local level, at the regional level. I know the ECA has also done a continental consultations. Now that is actually adopted, we have to understand what is in there, because those will be the conversation that we will have in Riyadh, after Riyadh, and towards the WISIS. So we have 5 central themes that were actually broken down into that GDC. So we now have the objective of these 5 principles. First, to close that digital divide and accelerate progress across sustainable development goals, which is I think 2030. So expand inclusion and benefit from the digital economy for all. Foster an inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital space that respects and protects human rights. The 4, advanced, responsible, equitable, and interoperable data governance approach. And finally, enhance international governance of AI for the benefits of the humanity. So those were the 5 central terms that were contained in that document that was negotiated by those 193 states. So a promotion for the Tech Invoice Office. A lot of people will be asking a question, why are we now introducing the Tech Invoice Office and those kind of things? So historically, decision-making power of the internet governance at the UN level was Geneva. So the ITU process, as she rightly explained, for Minneapolis to the 1998, to the WISIS process C 2003, Tunis Agenda 2005, etc. So everything was, around Geneva, where, other relevant experts, could work with the UN members directly. And the Tech Envoy was an advisory role to the Secretary General. Now, with the GDC seeks to change that. It wants to consolidate the power under the UN Secretary General's Tech Envoy Office in New York towards a more distinct multilateral approach. So what does this mean? This is what we have as a picture today. When you look at the Global Digital Compact, it means to, as I said, outline certain shared principles for an open, free, and secure internet for all. Unlike the UN process, that I was mentioning earlier, driven by the UN Secretary General, his taking voice. So it was adopted at the Summit of the Future. So they adopted this document in September, and some government wants that. As I said, 193 states participated in that process. Now, the matter is more than adopting the GDC. Next year, in July 2025, we'll have what is called the WSIS plus 20 review. And in that WSIS plus 20 review, we'll actually look at a multilateral review of the overall implementation of the outcomes of the World Summit on Information Society for people who have contributed so far. So this review will allow us to see the decision that we took in 2005, for example, to set up the IGF. Has it actually brought any concrete results? Bulanda was explaining right now that it may have it from, but it has allowed some stakeholder groups to have a voice, like civil society, the technical community, the academia. All those people today can sit on the table on equal footing, have a conversation, and I think that's what we are having here. And the WSIS has allowed us to actually have that participation. Now, in December, we'll be heading to Riyadh in a multi-stakeholder event that we do every year. It's open to all, and is the outcome, as I said, of the WSIS Tunisia 2005. So no decision-making power, as we all know, but critical place for stakeholders to engage with the UN. So as you know, the IGF is not a decision body, but the conversations that we usually have are recommendations that usually help every stakeholder group. So why the IGF is critical to us? And as she said it earlier, though it feels like we acknowledge today that the IGF represents a most effective tool to gather the complex actors to make up internet governance stakeholders. Also, the IGF encourages human rights-based, consensus-driven, and bottom-up discussions and policy suggestions, which follow the principles of open, free, and interoperable internet. And I think for those who have participated in these events, you notice that civil society have a discussion. Like yesterday, I was attending one session about internet shutdowns. Everybody has his, word, because we have the opportunity to sit at the table with the government. We have an opportunity to sit at the table with our legislators to have those kind of conversation. And though it lacks a concrete result, it doesn't mean there's no significant impact over the last 19 years. As I said, it's the non-binding recommendations. But when government attend, we have awareness, they listen to the stakeholders, and they listen to civil society, they listen to the private sector. So everybody actually have a voice. So for us, that is very important. Now, all roads are leading to that WSIS, because from the beginning of this whole conversation, everybody keeps saying that, will the IGF mandate be renewed next year, etc. So now, we're all looking at next year as a decisive year. As I said, in May next year, we'll have the WSIS review. Probably the mandate of the IGF will be renewed or not, but we have to contribute to that. So during that event, which will be in May 2024, the forum high-level event, it will be ITU high-level event. It happened May this year, and a lot of people in this community have participated. In September, some of you in this room have participated in the Summit of the Future, and discussed the GDC, as I said earlier, and negotiated during the Pact of the Future. Now, December 2024, as I said, we'll be all going to Riyadh, and it will be open to all of us. We'll still actually voice our concerns. And June 2025, the IGF in Norway, because next year IGF will happen in Norway. So we'll still have that conversation again in Norway, but as highlighted there, all the eyes are on September 2025, because it's September 2025 that all these processes will actually come to conclusion, and we'll review the overall implementation of the outcome of the World Summit of International Society of the Information Society, the WSIS. So in September, we'll all have the final word, whether we continue with this model or we go by another route. So she explained earlier what is at stake. The open, global, and interoperable internet should not be taken for granted. The multi-stakeholder internet governance is the ability, as I said earlier, to have all the stakeholders sitting at the table. Bear in mind also the human rights consideration. They have played a key role in internet governance. China and others are working to shift the focus from human right to development. So especially the, economic rights, etc. So all these elements are at stake. So we have to actually keep this in mind when we are actually participating in this process, to understand that if you are going this route, this is what is at stake. If you are taking the other route as well, this is what is at stake. So what can we do? And I think that is the most important part of this whole conversation. We are in this room or online from different background, different stakeholder groups. You ask yourself as internet user or coming from international organization, what can I do? So this, what can we do as civil society, because I speak from civil society perspective as end user. And I can tell you for sure that what we want an internet that is accessible, distributed, multi-stakeholder, agile, open and consensus-driven, basically what we have today. The same thing that we wanted in 1998 in Minneapolis, the same thing that we wanted in Geneva 2003, the same thing that we wanted in Tunisia 2005, the same thing that we discussed during the Net Mondial 2014, and the same thing that we are still discussing today is the same thing that we still want. Just keep it in mind like that. We said it's not perfect, but we think we can work towards, a model that can become almost perfect than taking a different route and reinventing the whole wheel. So, as I said, whatever happened, put your attention to September 2025. Whatever you can do before September 2025 should be, the most important consideration from this whole conversation that we are having. So how do we get the internet that we want? Because I said it, the same thing we wanted 1998 is the same thing that we are actually looking for today. But I know a lot of people will not get in that plane to Riyadh. So if you are not going to Riyadh, what can you do? Raise awareness. So this slide deck, we'll share it with you, share it with your community, share it with your parliamentarians, share it among the people who are involved in the process in your various countries, and also get involved. I think sitting in this room is almost that involvement, because yes, you spend your time to come and listen. So continue listening in those regional events. We have regional events that will happen before next year, September, before the WSIS review. So participate. We have a mailing list. So we share the slide deck so that you can actually join those mailing lists, so that you have all the resources that you need, to voice your concern to the right stakeholders that you want to actually speak to. We have ICANN mailing list, which actually facilitate communication and information exchange about the 20-year review of the WSIS. So at least you actually have all the conversation from all the stakeholders to see how you can actually voice your concern as well. Also, in your community, you can advocate, talk to your ministers, talk to your MPs, talk to the people you think that are carrying the voice of your country or are carrying the voice of your stakeholder group. So you can actually establish channel, organize webinars with people you think that they have a voice during those meetings, and always stand up for human rights. I think from civil society perspective, I always say that, because these routes, though some government are not happy when we raise the human rights concern during these meetings, at least they listen to our concern. So that is very important for us to still have this platform as civil society, so that we can continue this conversation with those governments that are our government that affect us directly. And also the next step. So the non-governmental stakeholders have the opportunity to endorse the GDC or taking an active part of the next step of its implementation. Organizations do not have to endorse the GDC to express interest in participating in the next step. The deadline is next month. And specific actionable engagement is not yet available, but more information is expected in early 2025 before the WSIS review. And these are basically what you can do. Before that, you can submit your inputs. So the ITU is actually, calling for feedback from stakeholders on its work on the WSIS +20, specifically the WSIS action line. So you can submit your feedback. We'll share the slide deck, as I said, so that you have access to those links before 31st January 2025. And also participate in the open consultation process that the ITU, UNESCO, ICANN, UNDP, all of them are doing those open consultation process. Please participate, raise your concern to shape, the program of that WSIS review event that is coming. You can also submit your feedback through the official submission form before 14 March 2025. And we also have other additional resources. This slide deck will be available in French, in Spanish. We share also some resolution declarations that can help you actually shape your narrative, and also the digital compact. We're talking about it. A lot of people haven't read it yet, so we still share that with you to go through it. The summit of the future outcomes, and those kind of declarations, we share them with you so that you can be able, to stand boldly and, voice your concern. So I think what we can do now is maybe open the floor, have people's question and input and concern, so that we see how, as civil society voices, we can actually rework on this deck, reshape the whole conversation to be able to participate in that whole process that I just outlined. So Bulanda, I will let you lead that part of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So we now open up, more curious to hear what your reflections are. What are some of your concerns, having heard what's been said this afternoon? So perhaps we could start from there in terms of what are some of our reflections or reactions. And then, of course, if there are any questions, we can take those as well. Thank you. I see there's also a hand online. And then...
Do we start from the room? Oh, I see.
I see.
Or for maybe inclusion purposes, we can start from the people online. Yeah. Then we take those out of the room.
Yeah. Madam Dorothy. Okay. So Dorothy Gordon, you may go ahead, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor. And thank you for the excellent summaries that have been given in terms of the challenge we have ahead. However, with the IGF, we do have some metrics for measuring the outcomes of the IGF. I would like you to comment on the reporting on those metrics and what we are seeing.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take perhaps an additional 2 more questions and then you can proceed. Okay, we can start from here and then we'll come to you, Madam.
Thank you very much. My name's Ross Gill. I work for the British government within our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. I'm based in Nairobi as the head of cyber for our network in Africa. And thank you very much for that presentation. I really enjoyed it, and it's really useful. And I'm looking forward to downloading these resources because I think they're also very useful. You're probably aware that we share your vision of the internet and are very interested in the road up to WSIS next year. and ensuring that the internet and the current structures are preserved and the spaces that give rights to for freedom of expression and so forth are protected. I mean, I had two questions. One of them kind of linked to the first question online about outcomes, because you mentioned that a lack of concrete results does not mean a significant impact over 19 years. I think what would be really useful is if there is any kind of illustrative examples of some of the impact of IGFs, particularly in conversations that we may be having with stakeholders who are not necessarily deeply familiar with the IGF, such as MPs or others that may want a bit more insight. Anything that you or others can share would be really useful. But my other question, and it's perhaps for others in the room as much as those on the panel, is as we go into WSIS next year, I'd be really interested at a national level across Africa. What is the mood music, and what are some of the insight and feedback that people are hearing from governments that they're speaking to, either within the countries that they're based in or work within, and some of the negotiating lines or positions that African countries are starting to think about? I know that there was the WSIS annual review meeting in Tanzania, I believe in October. So any insight from that is particularly welcome, because we're really interested in how African countries are going to approach that next year. And we want to be involved in having some of those conversations where possible with African countries to try and understand what their concerns are about WSIS, the mandate, and what they're seeing in terms of the value from IGF and how it can be protective and perhaps even enhanced. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good everyone. My name is Nenna. I come from the internet. DG, are you call? I'm glad that someone of the caliber of Dorothy Gordon is online following this panel. I think it's a huge honor to us. In the year 2000, Dorothy was hosting the Africa PrepCom when she was the Director General of the Kofi Annan ICT Center in Accra. So this is one of the people who are the predecessors of where we are today. And in this very room, I think we held some PrepCom talks. I have a few reflections, but let me begin by saying, again, my name is Nenna. Quick one about me. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, it has OSET, Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. It has me up there as an advisor, or as an expert advisor, but I'm speaking on my personal behalf. So the reflections I'm giving now are from my personal Nenna self. Like I said, we founded something called ACCESS, the Africa Civil Society on Internet, the Africa Civil Society for the Internet Summit, for the Information Society, sorry, ACCESS. ACCESS we led over the years through the engagement through the WSIS. And I can tell you I was in Geneva. I can tell you I worked hard for Tunis. For those of you who remember, I was a civil society speaker at Net Mundial in Sao Paulo. And I was also civil society speaker at the Summit of the Future, Action Days on our digital future. Again, I'm saying that I'm speaking on my personal behalf. There's a reason I'm insisting on that. Since Tunis, what we had in Tunis is called the Tunis Agenda. And the WSIS action lines, I have a few problems with the presentation that was made here. It summarizes things in a black and white perspective, which may not be of benefit. I know that internet governance is it's a crazy thing. And the UN itself is a very big thing. And if you don't know the process that led to what, we might get into this kind of summaries that are either or. And I'd like to warn people about that. Again, I'm speaking on my personal behalf. So there were processes that led to the Tunis Agenda. There was the WIGIG, there were working groups, there were definitions that we hold on to that gave us what we call the World Summit on Information Society in two parts. The first part in Geneva and the second part in Tunis. So over 3 years, we negotiated the Tunis agenda. The Tunis agenda gave birth to one thing called the Internet Governance Forum, right? Which is where we are today. We're the 19th one. So by next year, by Norway, we're having the 20th IGF. IGF is a dialogue space. IGF is a multi-stakeholder dialogue space. The only reason we still have IGF today is because IGF is not a decision-making body. This is very important as we go along. There was another outcome of the World Summit in Geneva. For some of you who are 20 years and 25 years, you may not know. It was called the Digital Solidarity Fund. I happen to have been the vice president of the Digital Solidarity Fund that did not outstay its first 5-year mandate because that had funding, because that had a constraining thing. Its headquarters was in Geneva at that time. It did not last beyond its first 5-year mandate because it did not have the same mandate as the IGF, right? The WSIS review is the annual review of the agenda that we all adopted. Between then and now, a lot of things have happened. We have moved from the millennium, moved from the MDGs to the SDGs. We have moved from ICT to digital and now to AI. A lot of things have moved, have changed. Now on OSET, in my other cap as the chief web advocate of the World Wide Web Foundation, we were contacted by the Office of the Secretary General to be a key participant in the digital cooperation agenda. Again, the Global Digital Compact is a child of the Global Digital Cooperation agenda. Now, for everyone who is new to this conversation, the Digital Compact is a subset handling about 5 pillars. It's a good way you presented it here. It does not take into consideration the whole of the digital cooperation agenda that the UN has. There are other things like the UN 2.0. Now, in closing, I want to say this. One of the things that we fought the UN about is multiplicity of initiatives and rarity of resources. If you followed, good thing Emmanuel mentioned it. For those of you who've been in IGF, you know I've organized a lot of consultations on the GDC. I organized them across the world. I made videos, I mobilized and blah, blah, blah. And those of you who were in September during the summit, you heard me speak. You had me consult in many places. You had me advise in many places. Here is what I'm saying now. This is 2025 because this is November. In 2 months, we're in the next year. There are issues. I am also on the program committee of the World Data Forum that just finished in Medellin in Colombia. We have a lot of things happening. The question is, the IGF that we have, do we want to keep the process? Do we want to keep the model? Are we talking about keeping the internet? Are we talking about keeping the event? On the IGF, since that is why we are here, please, I do not agree that the Office of the OSET, if that's a long name, the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, so for short, OSET. OSET only serves as a secretariat within the secretariat for countries. The agenda of the Secretary General of the UN is given to him by the General Assembly. So it is not that the Secretary General wakes up and says, we don't want this, we don't want this, we don't want that. The OSET is at the service of the Secretary General, which is at the service of the UN member states. So if you see something, if you see a mandate given to the UN, it is because member states have decided so. If you see that AI is taking a big role, it is because member states have decided so. So please, let's not say that the setup of an OSET is there to banish the IGF. That it cannot be. It cannot happen. Now, on the IGF itself, there is the global IGF convened by the UN, but there is also the regional, sub-regional, thematic, national, and even subnational internet governance forums. Again, let's not forget that the IGF is a dialogue space. So I don't think that even if the global mandate of the IGF is not renewed, which I doubt, because it's part of the GDC, the question is, the multi-stakeholder that we so much tout about at global level. I've had civil society question the choice of Ethiopia 2 years ago. But if we did not have the global IGF in Ethiopia 2 years ago, do you think that we would have grown the Ethiopian IG ecosystem to what we have today? I doubt so. So sometimes we need to forge ahead, even if it's not perfect, right? Now, we are going to Riyadh. I have had a lot of people complaining about the human rights issues in Riyadh. But if you don't go to Riyadh, if you don't start something, how are you going to grow an ecosystem? That's my question for reflection to all of us. Now, even if the UN does not renew the mandate of the global IGF, does that prohibit the AU, since we're in Africa, to hold a dialogue? By the way, in Europe, it's not called Europe IGF. It's called EuroDig, the European Digital Governance, something like that. It's a dialogue on internet governance. We have these things at home. Now, at your own national level, what is the IGF like? Because it is very easy to come here and activate for global IGF, but at national level, we don't want to practice that. And that is the end of my reflection now. For our friends from the UK government and FCDO, thank you again for supporting Africa IGF. Thank you for your presence. If someone says GIZ, I'd like to thank them, because these are governments who do not just speak at UN level, they also come down to national and regional levels to support this initiative. The biggest place we need impact is at home. It is very easy to come to Addis and make presentations and fire at OSET, who is sitting in New York or in Geneva. When you go down to Abidjan, let us talk to our governments. Let us talk to our MPs. Someone came here from Benin, the lady who came here. Let us see what we can do at national level. Because as Africans, as I close, there are countries whose connectivity level is at 80, 90%. They don't have the same challenges that we do. And so when we meet them in New York, the discourse is different. The conversation is different. These are people who are looking at greater things. But in Africa, we're still looking at connecting our people. So let's bring the conversation home. Let's continue the dialogue home, irrespective of whether IGF will be renewed or whether the WSIS will be renewed. But at home, that is where the rubber hits the road. Apologies if I've taken a lot of time, but you know, this is something I've been on and I spent 90% of my life on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing reflection, quite comprehensive. And I quite like that you said, you know, we need to forge ahead sometimes, even if the model may not be perfect. And really like the aspect about what are we doing at the national level. And for us, I believe this was the point of departure in terms of how do we capture your attention as participants coming from your countries in terms of what you can do within the next steps. So I'll answer the question since we are on the aspect of national level efforts. I know there was a question on what's the mood like. Semano can take the one on the outcomes of the IGF. Again, just to emphasize that obviously there have been outcomes. Just that I think the main criticism has been are there tangible outcomes within the IGF space? But I'll leave that to Emmanuel. So in terms of the mood in Africa around the GDC, so I think we saw even in the presentation, a number of governments have endorsed it. So obviously the mood, well, the endorsement is happening, but it's really questions of, are we endorsing because, you know, it is a UN process, we have to sign up, or are we endorsing because we understand some of the contents and ascribe to the contents of these proposals? And when the time comes, how do we then translate that into, you know, national efforts, national action? So from the government side of things, of course, we've seen traction in them endorsing. But overall, for different stakeholders, I don't know, even in this room, how many of us knew when, you know, with the GDC process at the national level, when our ministers, first of all, it's who was endorsing, did we even know? I mean, I come from Zambia, we were the co-chairs, and to be honest, there was no talk in the country whatsoever. You only know about this because you're involved within this space. It's not even something that would even make it to, you know, your national 19 hours or 7 p.m. news. Yes. So it's more a conversation that is out there. Perhaps only your ICT minister and a few of his officers would know about it. Of course, the president would be aware of that. But when you go to the wider stakeholders, it's really, no one really knows anything about it. It's you know, it's just something that's out there. So yeah, over to you, Emmanuel.
Okay, and thank you very much, Madam Gordon. I think Nina rightly highlights who she is. And I think her question is more for the public. I think the IGF, as we said, because I think the word tangible keep coming. And I want to use Nina's word, when he said the processes are different. For example, the GDC will have its own action-oriented and maybe tangible outcome, but the forum is called a forum. So as outcome, what I've actually, take note of is, if you take 2006, after Tunisia, when people are participating to the IGF, we had less than 1,000 people who attended in 2006. Last year in Japan, were more than 7,000. So you can see the shift in terms of participation to the IGF. And also the number of countries. 2006, you have 90 countries participating in the global IGF. Last year, we had 180 countries, meaning that a lot of countries have now, get into the process. And also the stakeholder diversity. Civil society, for example, you notice that every year they're like half of the people in the room, because it's the almost only opportunity that they have to voice their concern. And I think at the regional level, we observe those same metrics, those same trend, because it's the only opportunity where they can come and sit down and talk and go home freely. The other things is the youth participation, the MPs participations. The IGF try to innovate. Now we have the youth having a voice. We have the youth IGF, we have the parliamentarian track, and those are very things that we cannot measure tangible. But for example, as she said, an MP was sitting in the room here. She has been in this event for the whole week. She will not go to the parliament tomorrow and there will be a bill and she will sit down, because she has actually spent more than a week here in the parliamentarian track with a focused discussion on how, as a parliamentarian, she can contribute in shaping the digital future in her country. We also have the thematics, and I think every year the thematics, they move. Now we're talking about AI. Next year, if it's something else, we'll still talk about it. So the thematics, we keep discussing them. If I take this Africa IGF, we have more than 50 sessions that we are having with different topics. So that is also, an opportunity for our government to attend, learn best practices, civil society to come and see why government, is feeling, that hot on his seat and those kind of things. So I think it's still an outcome. And also inclusivity. I was not there 2006. I was still studying. But those who actually went there in 2016, I don't think we're having the youth on that table with their concern on the table. I'm not sure developing countries were having resources to attend especially civil society from developing countries, the youth for developing countries. Last year in Japan, we had more than 100 young Africans who attended that event, despite the visa restriction, etc. It means that there's opportunity for them to voice their concern, take their local concerns to a global level where all the developing partners are there to understand that this is the challenge in Kenya, this is the challenge in Togo, etc. Other outcome, I think the IGF has helped us having our national IGFs, which have become, an opportunity for all the stakeholders at the national level to discuss, but more importantly, the schools of internet governance. I think it has helped build the capacity. I'm sitting here today because my first participation into this ecosystem came through the Africa School of Internet Governance. Else, maybe today I'll be having a career in agriculture or journalism that I studied. So it's to tell you that those, events or those outcomes that I'm talking about today, we cannot actually, measure them, but we can basically see some of the impact. Because majority of the people in this ecosystem today, some of them have even been appointed as ministers in their countries. I take the example of Madam Margaret, who was reading the PRIDA project, establishing the national schools. Now she understands better, and she's at the leadership position. So, those are some of the, outcome. But as Nena said, and I'll land there, if the IGF want to, become, I don't think it's to compete technically, because we're speaking from civil society perspective, but I think we're thinking that, okay, it may actually prioritize state-driven and top-down frameworks where civil society may not have, the opportunity it has today to participate to it. We're also looking at, how the grassroots contributions like we have here today. I think we have a concurrent session going on now discussing multilingual, grassroots participation to the IG, those kind of things. We may not have, that opportunity. And also talking about the rights. When the states, they say 193 people endorse the GDC. And it's very difficult, for example, to know, has the country who wants to do that has consulted all the stakeholders at the national level? Those are some of the concerns for civil society. And if you ask me for my country right now, I spend more than a year asking who is the focal point. But I know we endorse it. I don't know the focal point. So those are some of the concerns that would be great. Yes. Is a technical advisor to the minister. Exactly. So that would be great, because at the national level, it's difficult getting, those information. So I think it's very, what we are saying is not that competing, but we have fears, and we are voicing those, those fears that the IGF is a different process. Let's keep it with its process, voicing our concern, doing our sharing of best practices, etc. While the GDC should be framework, should be binding, or whatever it is, it should continue also at that level, so that together we can actually achieve the digital future that we want. So again, and to conclude, the same thing we wanted yesterday, we still want it for the IGF. The GDC has its process, it will have its outcome, and we'll be happy that both process bring very tangible outcomes. So I pass the voice to Bulanda. I don't know if there's still a question.
Yes, but before that, I see here we have more reflections from Madam Dorothy Gordon. She says, IGF is not just an event, or it's a process, not just an event, and look at all the spin-off at country level. And in terms of specific stakeholder groups, for example, the youth, really just emphasizing also what Emmanuel had said. Yes, Osei, we can have you, and I don't know, do we have any other hands?
Yes, 30 seconds since we are far behind time. I'd like to say, just like Oliver Twist, we want more for the youth. We want more, and Emmanuel did mention more than 100 people were in Tokyo process. The youth want to be part, as I did mention in my earlier submission before this session, that oftentimes it has been like we are part of the prop when everything is done, and we are being as an add-on. The youth processes, you see little to no ministers around. It's always like, okay, let's hear you. We are an afterthought. And this whole conversation, I really hope all the acronyms and everything mentioned the youth are also part of the process and not an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osei. I don't know if there's other questions, but we'll make sure that we attach the link to the deck on the session page so that everybody can actually download it and have access to those resources. And I think there are contacts at the last slide if you want to actually, contribute to make this better. And I like why they now raise concerns about it. That's very good because this has been a data we have been building like for a period of time now. So it will be good to have input to it so that we have it as a tool to advocate. Thank you.